Chapter 2. We played death metal until 1991. We also naturally listened to other death metal bands, and with time came to the realization that all the bands actively tried to sound the same. Once one band, Morbid Angel, had become popular and had signed to, as we saw it, some big fancy record company, all the other bands wanted to sound just like them. Several even went so far as to travel long distances in order to record their albums in the same sound studio as that one band had used to get the exact same sound. They all sounded the same. They all looked the same. They all had the same PC lyrics or the same childish gore lyrics. What is the point of having all these bands if they all sound the same? What happened to originality, integrity, creativity? Do we really need 6 million different examples of the same? Isn't one enough? In reality, we were kind of ignorant and stupid because of course that is what always happens when someone is successful. Like Morbid Angel was. Their music was really cool and others wanted to be equally successful and therefore tried to make the same type of cool music. If you have a recipe for success in front of you, most of you will grab it and use it. Simple. When we one day in early 1991 decided to visit a guy Harold corresponded with, Euronymous, living in Ski in eastern Norway, outside of Oslo, we found that others too had noticed his pattern, and we were not happy with it. His own band Mayhem had been playing since 1984 and was a complete failure. They did not even rehearse. As he, Euronymous, put it, our bassist Necro Butcher is just smoking pot with his girlfriend, and our drummer Hellhammer is just running around Oslo screwing sluts. Their vocalist Dead had locked himself in a room in the house they rented and had basically stopped speaking to him. He almost only ever left the room to eat. Whilst other bands were signed and became famous, his own band did not even rehearse. And what kind of bands were signing to big companies? Bands with bland-looking kids in colorful jogging pants. Their own mini-album, Death Crush, that they had released themselves, was not only sold out, but frankly an embarrassing heap of garbage. Some sort of noisy funcore metal music. But they had since replaced the drummer and the vocalist and fairly recently released 2 tracks on a compilation album, and one of them was really good too, Freezing Moon. But that was already old news. Nothing happened with them in 1991. Mayhem was in practice dead. Then he saw that those other poser death metal bands who had all started long after their veteran band started up in 1984 had great success at the same time. Come on! This is called petty envy. But we, Harold and me, and the other guys in Bergen, Western Norway, failed to see this because we too disliked the current death metal trend. For a completely different reason, sure, but still. We all agreed that death metal had become a boring trend. The next day, some of the guys from Dark Throne came over with their new record, A Soulside Journey, released on a big British record company. They, still in their teens, wore white jogging pants and bland clothing, and Euronymous let them hear it. That was not how metal bands were supposed to look. Upon return, as agreed upon when there, I sent some ammo to Euronymous for his shotgun, and after that he sent a letter to Harold telling him Dead had committed suicide. After that we did not hear from him in a long time. I think in almost 6 months. We kept growing increasingly disappointed with death metal as a whole, both the guys in Old Funeral and the guys in Amputation, and in September 1991, I decided to leave Old Funeral and instead do something different. I had already made some tracks that were not suitable for Old Funeral, the Burzum track called Dunkelheit on the Philosophum album, and I figured I could do everything myself. At the same time, Olv from Old Funeral and Harold from Amputation decided to leave their bands and form a new band, Immortal. Old Funeral continued without Olv and me for some time, I think well into 1992, still playing death metal. Instead of listening only to death metal bands in that period, we started going back to listening to older music. Bands we used to like before we became fascinated with death metal. Thrash metal bands like Destruction, Creator, and Bathory. Some, others than me, also started listening to even older styles that they had listened to before. Heavy metal bands like Accept, and even Kiss. Also, I listened to more and more to underground white label house and techno music. And later on, 1992, even alternative music like When. And I think you can tell from listening to my early records. In any case, we found inspiration in other styles of music. That is, styles other than death metal. This certainly made an impact on our own music. Sadly, I do not remember exactly when, but at one point Euronymous wrote that he had moved to Oslo and opened up a metal shop there. Sometime in November, I think, there was a Morbid Angel concert in Oslo, and we decided to use the opportunity to visit his shop, called Helvete. Hell, by the way. Guys from different bands with different fanzines from all over Norway showed up, and we learned that Euronymous had had enough now, and that those stupid death metal kids in jogging pants were to blame for dead suicide. If you wanted to play extreme metal in Norway from now on, you better look metal too. Death to death metal! Now, this was of course pure nonsense. Dead did not kill himself because the other bands had members wearing jogging pants. Euronymous also boasted of having taken parts of Dead's skull and made necklaces of them that he had given to close friends. He further explained that he had taken pictures of the corpse, but had not yet had the films evoked by a photographer. He was afraid that if he went to a Norwegian photographer, it would cause problems for him. In the end, much later I think, he sent the films to the Netherlands and had them evoked by a Dutch photographer. And when he did, he naturally showed these to everybody in the scene. And for the records, no, I never received any such necklace, nor wanted one, and in fact never saw one either. He had given them away long before we had ever visited him in his shop in Oslo. Because of the success of many Swedish death metal bands, and because of Euronymous' reaction to that, this led to a rivalry between Norwegian black metal and especially Swedish death metal. These Swedish bands became the embodiment of trendy, multicultural, spineless, mass-produced death metal music. With images of posers with worried faces, all those poor starving Africans, in jogging pants on the covers, and with politically correct lyrics, "Think about global warming, brah." Now this was all fine and good for us in Bergen, because his envious hatred for death metal bands and their vast success coincided with our disdain for the complete lack of originality in death metal bands, and not least with our racism. At least some of the Swedish bands had colored band members, and disdain for the politically correct image of those bands. So it all kind of blended together and became a joint disgust for death metal, where he had picked up our arguments, and we, sadly, picked up his arguments. Dark Throne had also at the same time just recorded their A Blaze in the Northern Sky album, and probably because of Euronymous' influence, had just before recording it decided to change the whole, originally a death metal album, into what we today can easily define as the first black metal album ever. They also looked more cool than before, although I think Fenriz had always looked the same, even when they played death metal. Finally, some different music. Finally, something original.